I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille.
We have been expecting you. Ladies and gentlemen, you are very welcome to the Lecture Theatre 1 in the Tongue Auditorium for Beckett and the Wake. Some safety announcements first. Your exits are here, and we request that you would turn off your mobile phones. And so now the honour and privilege falls to me to introduce photographer John Minihan, who probably for many in the room requires no introduction. But for those of you who do, John is one of the world's foremost photographers. If anyone here is a Beckett fan, which is kind of likely, right, considering the day that's in it, you already know John's iconic photographs of Sam. I won't go into the story because that's obviously why he's here to tell us, but you will know him from that. If you are a photographer in general, you may already know his work from his cornucopia of incredible portraits of some of the world's leading artists, writers and thinkers. So please join me in giving a huge Beckett Unbound welcome to John Minihan.
Thank you. Oh, listen, thank you so much. On a Sunday afternoon, I'm so happy to be back in Liverpool after 26 or 7 years. I mean, when I used to live in London, we arrived yesterday there myself from County Cork, and I took a walk around the Athy because I used to cover the Labour Party conference back in the day of Harold Wilson, and I spent a week in the Adelphi, which had, at that point, I was told, the best press club in the world was in the basement downstairs, and its array of whiskies was incredible. They didn't even have it in Glasgow. In the Glasgow Press Club didn't have such an array of whiskies. So I'm really happy to be back here, and I want to thank Nick and Adrian and Jerry and everybody associated with the Beckett Unbound Festival. Sorry you've had to look at this turgid picture of myself for about 20 minutes, but we'll get on to the real stuff. And I'm still. I've just pressed this button. Here we go. Yeah. Beckett needs no introduction. Certainly not from me, and certainly lots of people here will know Sam. I remember years ago Fintan O'Toole saying that many people's perception of the author really comes through John Minihan's photographs. That may be true, I don't know, but I was really pleased, and it's nice because in Beckett's The Unnameable, he talks about, I seem to recognize their faces from photographs, perhaps. So Beckett was really, really interested in photography. And before I go on to that, I want to tell you how it came to happen. Like Beckett, we know, the Wake, my particular sequence of photographs in the Wake, you probably don't know about. And I'll tell you about that later when we see the pictures. But in the summer of 1969, I was standing at the picture desk of the Evening Standard when a rather arrogant backbencher shouted across the picture desk, some reclusive Irishman in Paris has just won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Do we have any photographs? And of course, that really kind of struck a chord in me, because around that time I was befriending another Irish artist called Francis Bacon in Soho, who was born 2 years after Samuel Beckett. They both came from a very similar background, and both very different in each other, I think. But anyway, I went up to the library of the Evening Standard, and there was only one muzzy photograph of the author. So at that moment, I made it my business to try. I was going to track down this man. And of course, during those intervening 10 years, there was lots of plays going on at the National Theatre and bits and bobs, and a couple of Irish pubs that I know were putting on some of the plays. Anyway, but I always knew, because I do believe in miracles, and you'll understand this later on, that our paths would cross, because as I said, I'd already met Francis Bacon, who was, as I said, I mean, normally in the Daily Telegraph, they'll describe him as, a British artist. And I'd always had this thing about trying to bring Bacon and Beckett together. Anyway, somebody gave me an address in Paris for Francis Bacon, which, as it turned out, it wasn't the right address. Because had it been the right address, the mark of the man was he would have actually written to me and apologized or whatever, or invited me over anyway. So in 1980, I'm actually having a drink in the Windsor Castle pub in Notting Hill Gate. And one of my friends said, John, one of the guests in the High Park Hotel, Samuel Beckett. Now Liam, although he described it as a tawdry job in the High Park Hotel, he loved reading Irish literature. He was a very great big fan of Paddy Kavanagh and would always sometimes recite some of Kavanagh's little poems, or even the Yeats thing, I will arise and go now, and that kind of time. After I would listen to him. But I went down to the High Park Hotel, and I was dripping with Nikon cameras, and the reception, I asked for Mr. Francis Bacon, and the reception said, there's nobody of that name is a guest in our hotel. And I knew if Liam had told me he'd seen him in breakfast. So I left a note. I understood Beckett's reluctance to talk to journalists. But I knew, in fact, from the research I've been doing over the 10 years previously, that he had a fondness for photographers. He rather liked having his picture taken, and was photographed by Cecil Beaton, by Brassai, which I'll tell you more about, because Brassai lived in Paris. And Sam, as Sam told me, knew him as a sculptor. I'm going to move on to this other thing now. But, this photograph is Beckett in room 604 of the High Park Hotel. But I left this note. You'll have to, sometimes I go off on a bit of a tangent, because over the last 16 months I've been having a procedure for a rather nasty thing in my throat, which, thanks be to God, I'm sort of in the light now, and every day I'm getting through the tunnel, and I do believe in miracles. But anyway, I left this note saying, Dear Mr. Beckett, welcome to London. Yes, I'm a photographer, and I want to show you 20 photographs of my hometown, Athy, that I've been photographing at that stage over 20 years. And I understand if you don't want to be photographed, that's fine, no problem. But there's a special sequence on the Wake, which I'd like to show you. Left a note in, said to make sure Mr. Beckett sees this. I'm phoning up the next morning at 9 o'clock, which I did. 9 o'clock the following morning. Who's calling? Gave her all the information, and she said, hold on. Anyway, within seconds, this rather gentle Dublin voice says, thank you, Mr. Minihan, for your note. I'd like to see the photographs. How about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? Well, I was absolutely delighted about it. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Beckett. See you at 9 o'clock. Now, I was expecting this figure of genius, because on the journey, you see some photographers, they see themselves as celebrities, which is the world we live in. And it's rather boring, because they're not really. They're blessed to be in the company of genius. And on the journey, occasionally, you're in the presence of genius. I'm not a scholar. I don't ask questions. Like Sam would, professors would come up to me and say, what did you talk about? And I said, well, Sam said to me, what's the price of a pint in McDay's pub now? And they were, because I don't have, anyway, the next morning at 9 o'clock, I'm in the lobby of the hotel, and the receptionist calls Mr. Beckett. Anyway, she says, can you go to room 604? Now, I was expecting him to come downstairs, go through the usual pleasantries of, which normally happens in these things. Because people talk about people and photographers, they only, like a 1/60th of a second is nothing of anybody's life. I mean, David Bailey, like with respect to Mr. Bailey, who I admire, but you don't know anybody. And I was working, if the opportunity came, and I said miracles do happen, and you'll understand what I mean by this a little bit later. I had it planned out. I wanted to photograph Beckett, but everything about this man I wanted to hoover up, everything. In London, what he was doing. Because, I mean, when you think about Beckett, he's published by small publishing houses, like Barney Rossett in the United States. John Calder was his UK publisher with Calder Publications. And in Paris, of course, Jérôme Landon, Les Editions de Minuit. And yet there's not an acre on the planet that's not waiting for a visitation of Godot. It's extraordinary. But then, again, not so extraordinary when you think about the Virgin Mary. Everybody's heard of her, but very few people have seen her. You know what I mean? But all these, as a young lad growing up in the Athy, County Kildare, I was infused with all this kind of religious iconography. And it's not done me any harm, really. You know what I mean? It's just not. And I remember John Calder saying to me for years, Beckett was an atheist or an agnostic or whatever those words mean. I haven't got a bloody clue. All I know is I said to John Calder in Paris once, we were having dinner in Les Select, I think it was, and I said, when I left Sam in Paris in December 1985, he said, God bless. God bless? I said, yes, he said, God bless. Anyway, all these little things like it just as it was. But this is Beckett in his room 604. And I think that's just important because he was in London to direct his Endgame with the Rick Clucci drama group. Rick Clucci spent 12 years as a prisoner on a murder charge in San Quentin. And while he was incarcerated, there was a traveling group of actors going around and doing Beckett's Waiting for Godot. And Rick Clucci, you can imagine Rick, interesting man. He told me he was completely mesmerized by the musicality of Beckett's words, and he managed to talk the then governor of San Quentin into allowing them to have what used to be called the hanging chamber for the thing in San Quentin. And they used that as a rehearsal hall, but Rick got some of the cons performing Beckett's work. And Beckett heard about this, and this was the mark of who Beckett was. Mr. Bragg, Mr. Bragg, the author who did the South Bank show many times, he told me once, for something like 25 years, he wanted to get Beckett on the South Bank show, and he always refused. And yet this man, Beckett, will travel from Paris to London to direct this ex-convict at the Riverside Studios doing Endgame and Kraft's Last Tape. And the boy and then came back again in 1984 to do his masterpiece, Waiting for Godot. And Rick's son, which was called Beckett Clucci, was the boy in the thing. I thought, this is amazing anyway. I'm not great at this technology, but I'm actually getting used to it. I have to... The right, here we go. Thanks, Nick. Oh, sorry, I have to go back one here. Here go just yet. Yeah. This is another shot of Sam in the room. This is Mr. Beckett, what we call in Ireland, throwing a few shapes. No, because he thinks he's never going to see me again. I think this is frame 3 on my Nikon 35mm camera. And I like the way the hand and the glasses, and he thinks he's never going to see Minihan again, but he hadn't got a clue what was in my head. And I kind of like it, and he was there. And of course, while he's looking at my photographs, on the bed, I mean, there's a little, by the bedside table there's a well-thumbed copy of Endgame. But, and of course, in 1980, after I shot the pictures in the hotel, I asked for Sam's permission. Could I go to the Riverside to photograph the rehearsals? And of course, he said, yes. but you won't be in the way, will you? No, of course not. But of course, at that time, in 1980, a 200 mil lens, if you cocked the shutter, it sounded like somebody was banging a drum, you know, so I had to sort of choose my moments very carefully. Technology has changed since then. Everything changes. But having got the pictures in 1980, and then, of course, as I said, he returned in 1984 to direct his masterpiece, I realized the heartbeat of the whole sequence. I needed to get Mr. Beckett in Paris. Paris, the place that gave birth to photography. That's where it was born. This man, you know, Louis de Gour, you know, exclaimed from his balcony, "I have arrested the light." And Beckett, of course, was really familiar with all the photography. I mean, we wouldn't know what Julia Margaret Cameron photographed Alfred Lord Tennyson, you know, with the black cloth over the head, and you know, we wouldn't know what Tennyson looked like. Or Baudelaire. Baudelaire was photographed by Notre. And I always liked the collaboration between certain photographers, you know, going back. Like Giselle Freund took those marvelous pictures of James Joyce in Paris. And of course, Henry Miller took those wonderful photographs or rather, Brassai photographed Henry Miller in Paris and, of course, in New York. And I've liked that collaboration because the image has now overtaken the word in many respects as a means of communication. I mean, and I understand how important it is. And and the technology in photography is every week there's a new innovation. For me, I'm still, that Rolleiflex you saw earlier, you know, like 12 images it takes to Rolleiflex. Or just like a camera German, but I have a Nikon as well. But I still like to take photographs in black and white, because it reminds me when I was about 5 being taken to Mass. Do you remember that word, Mass? That's why I went to the cathedral this morning, because I want a bit of sense of joy. I need a bit of redemption in my life. And I went to the cathedral and lit a candle and gave thanks. But I remember as a 5-year-old being taken to Mass by my aunt and uncle who reared me up, because my mother left, you know, when my father died before I was born. My mother then, at that particular time in Ireland, in the sort of late 40s, you know, just they'd left their children with their sisters or their brothers. Anyway, my aunt and uncle, thanks be to God, reared me up. But then we left the Thai after thing. But anyway, my aunt took me to Mass. And I remember a prayer book bulging. It was open with what we call in memoriam cards. You don't really see many of them anymore, and there's not that kind of thing. But I see black and white photography as a kind of, as a memorial card. I can see my presence here today as a kind of in memoriam. When I take a photograph, because it's now, you know what I mean? It's like Proust said in one of his books, a photograph is a mirror with a memory. And I've always been, you know, interested in the Mass card. And I collect old Victorian, because, you know, love them or loathe them, Queen Victoria and Albert realized, you know, when Victoria was came into the Queen in 1838 or something. And then photography with the go was invented in 1839. Albert realized the potency of having, photography is a mass means of communication. So, of course, the best collection, and I saw it 2 years ago at Kensington Palace, and I think there's one showing at the moment, of the Royal Photographic Collection, which is incredible, you know, to such a collection, because Victoria, not only did she, they employed photographers to photograph their palaces and their grand homes and the palaces and their, the Balmoral castles and palaces and every room and every piece of furniture. And they employed certain photographers to do all this. It's like a man called Mr. Fenton photographed the Crimean War, which was the first time people saw dead bodies on the battlefield. Sadly, today, a lot of people, with the new innovations in photography, I understand, I'm not decrying digital photography, I just don't do it myself. But if I was working I understand how important it is in what they call theaters of war. But no, it's just important. And Beckett had this knowledge. He understood. When he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, he was in Algiers. And of course, the place was flooded. You know, his French publisher picked up the award. And Sam refused to talk to the reporters, but was quite happy to come down the stairs. He was smoking a Havana cigar, a Cuban cigar. I say Havana cigar because I rather liked them myself, actually. Monte Cristo number 4, if anybody's interested. But you know, that's true. Nothing to do with my throat, but maybe I should. Anyway, but there's an Associated Press photograph, and you may remember like back in the days of what they used to call wire machines. There was agencies like United Press International, Associated Press, this, that, and other. And they would send over on the wire, these wonderful pictures with a caption, And of course, one of the photographs, I had it for years until some scurrilous person looked at it and then pilfered it from me somewhere down the line. Anyway, but it was a picture of Sam coming down this staircase in Algiers, smoking a cigar and looking very tan with his hair cropped. And I thought, yes. And so I was building up all this knowledge of the author from a very long time. But anyway, I wanted a picture in Paris. And I wrote to Beckett, who wrote back to me in those little distinctive cards with his name embossed on the top of it. Dear Mr. Minihan, I'd be very happy to see you in Paris, provided you leave your camera at home. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Anyway, we met in the first week of December in 1985. And I'd already, on the way up to his apartment on Boulevard Saint-Jacques, I'd already spotted one of those rather interesting French bars on the Boulevard Saint-Jacques. I said, this would be great, the type of bar with the gentleman with the white cloth underneath there over him and stuff, and black. And so when I saw Sam, I said, Sam, I found a place we can do the pic. No, you follow me. He had his own favorite Parisian bar, which was a hotel called the PLM Hotel on the Boulevard Saint-Jacques, literally 5 minutes walk away from his apartment. Now, Beckett's apartment was one of those interesting buildings built in the, maybe late 50s, very early 60s, with 12 apartments. And I'd already, looking at this, and I photographed it even before Sam came downstairs. I saw the 12 names, and it just said one of them was Beckett. Of course, there was more mail bulging out of his box than anybody else's. But I photographed it because everything to do with this man, Beckett, for me, interests me. Because if I take photographs, I like to hang them on the wall. I like to show people. And young photographers today, when they see me wandering around with my Rolleiflex camera, they think it's a museum piece that should be in the glass box and just there. But, as they're traipsing around with thousands of pounds worth of digital camera. But it's about seeing, you see. It's about, it's about seeing. It's not, you can't afford to waste film. Anyway, Sam walked me down to the PLM, which was a hotel, one of those kind of newly built hotels in the early 60s, full of Japanese airline pilots, and talking on the cafe was on the ground floor. And we sat, and it was busy, of course, and we sat, he took me to a corner, and we chatted away. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and because there was drinks, there was, little brandies and little coffees and lots of. That was that's the time I was photographing him, emphysemic, and he was smoking little cigars. I think they called them cigarellos. And while I'm talking to him, I'm scouting around this coffee shop because, should the occasion arise, I'm going to take this photograph of this immense man in literature. I know what to get. So we're chatting away, and he was excited. He was talking about film. This is, like Beckett's incursion into the world of movies. His American publisher talked him into writing a film script with the generic title Film, which was a 28-minute black and white silent movie starring the silent movie star Buster Keaton, who, as I was told by somebody over the years, Buster Keaton did it because he didn't understand what it was all about, but he needed the money as he lived in a condominium in Florida. And you know what? It's basically I'm looking at you kind of film. It's just we're all being perceived, and of course Keaton comes around and he's trying to. He knows the camera is it's E for I, and then of course Keaton is O for the object. He knows he opens his door and he sees a mirror. And this is the interesting part about this story because it's still fascinating. I love telling you this story. He opens the door and sees a mirror and he shrouds it with a white sheet. Now, when Mr. Beckett is looking at my photographs in room 604, even that number is important, 604. One of the photographs is of Mrs. Katy Tyrell in the wake room, and the mirror is shrouded in a white sheet, which we're going to see very shortly. Because part of the mythology in this town is, look at me for you're looking at a reflection of yourself, for death is the beginning. It's the only reality we can be assured of. We're born and we're going to die. And I've always felt, I never went further than the Christian Brothers, really. And of course, I worked for the Fourth Estate. But I always found it was extraordinary, that I should, because I spent 34 years photographing my hometown, Athy, County Kildare. Nobody's ever going to spend that amount of time doing anything. And when the Second Warburg came to publish my book of photographs of Beckett, I said, you can only do that with the assumption you will publish my thigh pictures. Because Beckett understood the importance of those photographs. Because I had people's names. You can walk into a shop in Dublin and look at wonderful postcards of an old man sitting having a pint with the Guinness sign beside him or something, which is, one corporate assassin eats up another now these days. But you give people in names, you lend dignity to the occasion. Sam would say, you look at the photographs, who's this? There's wanted pictures. He was curious about two men at a bus stop in Athy, in Emily Square, two elderly gentlemen. Now, there could have been Vladimir Estragon, and they're waiting for the early morning bus to come from Dublin. Who's getting off, going back home, you know what I mean? Like my aunt and uncle, we were always going back home to Ireland. And at that stage, I knew a little bit of, I didn't realize I was photographing Beckettian characters, but I was. And Beckett was delighted that I knew the names of these people. Who's that? Oh, that's Bertie Doyle, or that's Paddy O'Rourke. Interesting. Fine portrait. I'm going to move on another one just for a second. But Sam had this understanding of photography, and he was telling me, which fascinated me, because I got to know André Cortez, the Hungarian photographer, who was the preeminent, who lived in Paris in his 20s, and photographed Eisenstein. Eisenstein, the battleship Potemkin, which there's an image in that, film, people call it movies, of a nurse on the Odessa steps and with the shattered eye, you know what I mean? And of course, Beckett wrote to Eisenstein to ask if he could work as an assistant on film in Moscow. The postcard that Beckett wrote to Eisenstein, the letter is in, I think, the first, there's 4 publications of the letters, and it's in the first one, I gather. So Beckett was interested in film. He understood the power of communication, as his neighbor, as he told me, was the Hungarian photographer Brassai, who, of course, many people know the collaboration with Brassai and Henry Miller. And that really opened up. It was wonderful for me to hear all this. And after the conversations in December 1985, I took my photograph of Sam in the cafe, and of course, I'm on the street, and I photographed him with, on his, and he's, I mean, I'd love to know what's going on in his head, but the thing is, he trusted me. That's the important thing. Trust is so important for a photographer and people. And this is today, like, I mean, it's, I don't find a lot of things out there anymore with I think. But anyway, this shot here, Beckett directs Beckett. This is Sam in the Riverside Studios, Hammersmith, because he was relegated from the Royal Court Theatre, which, of course, he was performing in from the early 70s, very early 70s. I remember in January this year, I was photographing Stephen Ray, who was doing Endgame with Pat McGee at the Royal Court Theatre in London. And of course, Stephen was well prepared to do Kraft's Last Tape, and he did it at the Project Theatre in Temple Bar. And of course, I went down to photograph it because it's my favorite play to photograph. And of course, it's Beckett's most autobiographical piece of work. The man looking lovingly into his eyes as Sam is directing, it's all wrong, or whatever, is a German director called Walter Asmus. And Walter, Sam designated Mr. Asmus to be his assistant director. And again, I'm actually one of these clanging kind of, 200mm lenses to try and thankfully, thank God, Sam's face is sharp, and you're looking at Carawan, that conductor, doing his bit there. But I like that picture very much. But this is Beckett directs Beckett. And I like that. Everything about Beckett, for me, fascinated me for years. There was an Irishman some 16 years ago in Dublin who bought Beckett's, I think they called it a CV2. I can't speak French. Well, only a little, Le Budget Village, s'il vous plaît. That's the only bit I know. And but I want to put. This man had acquired Sam's Deja Vu, which Harold Pinter and John Calder had been driven around the back streets of Paris with Sam. John Calder told me he was taking his life in his hands, being driven by Beckett at 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course, that's the logbook saying where, a sort of thing. But, all these little things, there's not many authors you can photograph that people seem to be fascinated by Beckett. It's just, even, his letterbox is interesting. The car he had, and even in the little car, in the cigarette ashtrays, there was still kind of Gitan or Gulwat, some French cigarettes butts were still there. This is Sam in 1980 directing the American actor Bud Thorpe. They're doing Endgame at that stage. After rehearsal, Sam would go backstage to this little sort of bar in the Riverside. You could see Bud Thorpe with his head's down and he's exhausted. And the man with the white hair is a wonderful man who's left us now, Alec Reed. Many of you may know Alec Reed, who was a contemporary of Sam's in Trinity, and of course wrote a very fine book about Beckett. And Sam, of course, was the kind of gentleman he always acknowledged the people he liked, and that's in the bar. This was on another day during that week, in fact. It's on a Saturday afternoon. I always remember that because there's traditional Irish music being played at the bar. And one of the shots, I don't know if it's I don't think it's on this reel, but one of the shots, I'm with Sam and I buy him a drink. I said, what would you like? He said, I have a bottle of Guinness. And I can't remember. Anyway, he poured out the Guinness. And I said, Sam, you can't drink that. Everything I'm telling you, believe me, is the absolute truth. There's no fiction for me because my pictures, tell their own story. And I said, Sam, you can't drink that because it should have been drunk by June 1984. And this was like about August. It was in the summer of that particular year. And he's examining the bottle of Guinness. Now, that photograph is in Dublin Airport, and it's been there since the mid-'80s. Many people come back and say, Jesus, I was in the bar there and I saw your photograph. It's now full of, cigarette smoke is all over it and everything. But anyway, but that was it. So Sam was listening to traditional Irish music there. And he's smiling. People say he doesn't smile. Of course, he was smiling there. He was talking to Alec Reid at the time. And here you see, with photographs sometimes, a photograph is a testament to our innocence, to our guilt, whatever. But it's amazing. We it's so important. And people read pictures, like you have to read a photograph different than you may read a paragraph. You see, here people think, I am not a paparazzi photographer. I've never photographed someone that didn't want to be photographed. And he's looking at me. People think he's smiling at me, but he's not smiling at me. One of the actors is calling him over because they're with somebody who's, this one of the cast wants to introduce him to somebody. So there's a sequence of pictures of Sam coming over with the other actors to do it. But, and of course, even from the back, this is an important picture because I always remember seeing a picture of James Joyce from the back. But we know this is Beckett with his bag. Now, that picture was published in Vogue some years ago. And they said, Beckett with his Louis Vuitton bag. It's outrageous. I mean, he never evidently, this is his work notes from rehearsals anyway, but it's how photographs can be distorted, and particularly in the digital world today. Some man is drinking a bottle of Beck's at a Labour Party conference, and the Beck's suddenly morphs into a bottle of Moët Chandon, anyway, but there we go. Now we come on, I think we come into another, the Wake. Now, the photographs of the Wake this is my most important work as a photographer. And the pictures of Beckett would not exist without these photographs. And this is why I believe in miracles. You see, this is one of the shots, one of the first shots I took of Mrs. Katy Tyrell, who died in February 1977. Now you can imagine Samuel Beckett looking at these photographs. The mirror is shrouded with a white sheet, which goes back. And he didn't discuss this with me, and I didn't know at the time the connection with Berkeley and Beckett and writing his script, which he did call film. But that's it. Look at me, for you're looking at a reflection of yourself, and that's the beginning. And Mrs. Tyrrell, of course, above her head is a photograph of one of her daughters who passed on before the mother. And Mrs. Tyrrell, when you see it, I think I have it close up here. I have another one here, I don't know. But Mrs. Tyrrell, as many people describe to me, she looks like a North American Indian. And she's wearing the Legion of Mary burial shroud. Now, I have a particular devotion to the Madonna. I don't know why particularly, but I do. And, it's one of the things all my life which, and I think she's infused my life with belief. And that's the one thing that's missing, I think, a lot in this day and age, spirituality. It's something which I happen to believe in. But Mrs. Tyrrell, I mean, again, the incongruity of an Irish town. And I'm with, my pictures of Beckett come together. He's looking at these photographs. And Mrs. Tyrrell with the rosary wreaths wrapped around her. But blue is the color associated with the Madonna. And back in 1979, there was a gallery in Mayfair called Hamilton's. It's still there, and it was owned by a gentleman called Pat Matthews. I had my photographs of the Wake of Katy Tyrell published in the British Journal of Photography. Mr. Matthews had seen, and with just a sequence of photographs of the wake in this really distinguished photographic magazine, which George Bernard Shaw used to write, because, like, you know, so many of our Irish authors, like George Bernard Shaw, he was an enthusiast with photography. John Minihan Synge, you know, Beckett was a fan of Synge's photographs. Synge, apart from photographing in the Aran Islands, you know, using photography as an aid memoir to what the islands are wearing, but he was also in Wicklow, and there's a sequence of photographs of Synge he took of two tramps on a Wicklow road wearing bowler hats and hobnail boots. Now, Beckett would have seen that pictures. I know he would. There could have been, as I said, Vladimir Estragon. But this is the family of Mrs. Tyrrell here looking at me. And the lady on the left, one of the daughters, you know, she got very angry, you know, because I had an exhibition in Dublin called The Wake of Katy Tyrell, and for some reason I got a solicitor's letter. You know, she was obviously thought I was exploiting this situation, which was really far removed from the truth. But it was very disturbing, and I was very upset by it, because the son gave me permission, and other members of the family, to go in when Mrs. Tyrrell was only dead 4 or 5 hours on that February morning to take those photographs. And then I had a very fine solicitor called Mr. Ivan Owen, who said, "John, you look depressed." I said, "I'm depressed. I just had this letter calling me I was an intruder." And then, of course, I showed him a picture. I said, "This lady's calling me an intruder, and she's in front of with her mother in the background. Leave that with me," he says. Nothing more was heard about the thing. But nonetheless, it disturbed me. Mrs. Tyrrell is being removed from the Wake house. And, of course, the two gentlemen there, Martin Rigney, who was the undertaker, and Mrs. Tyrrell is like a statue. She's still saying, "Look at me, for you're looking at, you know, life is energy." You know, but she's statuesque, just there doing. And of course, you know, the general family, there's a 60-watt bulb illuminating the room. And of course, I had this expertise as a photographer. I knew how to do these things, and I think the exposure was about 1/15th of a second, you know, with the lens wide open. But the family saying the rosary and doing something, and of course, you know, you look at the faces. This was in Ireland of, you know, fairly well etched into the faces there of hardship and suffering. And there's the cortege going to the medieval churchyard. Yeah, and for 2 nights and 3 days, I photographed Mrs. Tyrrell from the deathbed to the grave, you know. And of course, this is, you know, many people probably know this reminiscent of in Ireland. People couldn't afford to have marble crosses, but this metal cross here. Sometimes you'd see about 4 or 5 different metal hearts of families, and, you know, they'd all be added to the thing. And of course, you know, some people say Minihan's girlfriends. But the conversation about death, you know, the ladies, all their names, I mean, I have all their names there. And of course, in memoriam, you know what I mean? This is a little section which I put together. Well, I didn't put it together, a friend of mine put it together, of people I photographed who passed on. This is Seamus Heaney. I was asked to photograph Seamus for his 70th birthday, I think it was 2009. And everyone said, "Well, what's he reading?" And I do remember it was an American monk who died in Vietnam, so he died in the bath. I don't remember his name. Some people say the CIA topped them off or something, but anyway, I can't think, but that's what I think Seamus was reading there. And of course, when Seamus saw the photograph, he wrote back to me and said, John, loved the photograph because you captured me in my inspirational Aran sweater. Did I? I thought, yeah, good. That sold a lot of Aran sweaters to a lot of poets because, you know, you can shake a tree in County Kildare and 40 poets will fall off, all wearing Aran sweaters, you know, God forbid. And, you know, like the publishers of Beckett, the man, this, you know, I brought John Calder over to Ireland many times because a friend of mine, Dr. Micheál Fanning, had a very good literary festival called the Bealtaine Festival in Dingle. And I said, well, bring over John. He said, can you? I said, I can arrange that. So John came over, but he had a little repertory company. So they did Waiting for Godot in this Church of Ireland, you know, long defunct Church of Ireland. And of course, I kind of liked it. And even when I was taking the picture, you know, I thought, I hope I'm not taking as it turned out, it was the obituary photograph in the Telegraph. John, he was telling a lot of his friends had passed on. I just want to add about Calder again. When John Calder was publishing Beckett, it was just, you know, covers, just a plain cover, you know, Malone Dies or What or whatever the novels it was. He didn't, Paper and Paper had all the plays. And I said to John, you put a photograph of Beckett on the cover and you quadruple your sales, which is what, of course, Penguin in the early days had those, you know, that off-color red with the white strip and, you know, then suddenly they started putting on photographs from the Magnum collection, whatever was appropriate to whoever they were publishing. But their sales just quadrupled. And John Calder did that, of course. And he said, Minihan, you're absolutely right, in fact. Yeah, it was pleasing to me. It's always nice for the photographers he's worked on. I told you about Bacon. During all these years, of course, I spent a lot of time in Soho. Because I wasn't really one of those guys who had you remember in the day when you had a checkbook and then you had a check card which guaranteed the thing. Now, I was never one of those lucky guys to get the check card. So I had to know your friendly publicans, as I did. And I knew them in Kilburn, of course, naturally enough. And I knew them in Soho, you know, Gaston, Berlemont, and the French. And Gaston would always change my check, and I'd always be running around with certain people. One of my great friends was a wonderful writer called Stan Gebler Davis. And Stan and myself would always be in the corner there, and I'd have the checkbook. He didn't have a checkbook, nor a check card. But Gaston would change a check for me at 6:30 in the evening, and I'd have to say, Gaston, can I have that check back and put another tenner on it, and not a problem. And then we go to the colony room. But anyway, Bacon, of course, and his friend William Burroughs, they both, of course, knew each other in Tangiers. And I wanted to bring Bacon and Beckett together. Now, it never happened, but it happened in an exhibition I did, Bacon, Beckett, and Burroughs, which I did at the October Gallery in 1989. Now, Burroughs, of course, on the other hand, it was an amazing kind of interest in him. I spent a week with him in London, and when I mentioned I was going to do this exhibition, he was so excited to be on the wall with Samuel Beckett. And of course, he was telling me the story, how him and Susan Sontag and Allen Ginsberg in Paris back in the day, it was in Berlin, they were in Berlin, and Beckett was in Berlin at the same time, and Ginsberg and Burroughs and Susan Sontag knocked on the door, and Beckett opened the door, and Burroughs had a bottle of Irish whiskey, and of course the chat went on for 25 minutes until Burroughs felt, I feel, like he wanted us to leave, and they left. But he was very excited. Like most writers are interested in Beckett. I've always found that fascinating, and that's why they allow me to come into their life with my Rolleiflex and do a photograph of 1/25 of a second at 4. I don't know them, but I do know them, but it's nothing out of anybody's life, and yet I was very fortunate to be able to to do that. But William Burroughs and Francis Bacon, that Bacon did interest me. Working in Fleet Street, there was a lot of photographers, staff photographers, and I joined the Evening Standard in 1969, having done 5 years as an apprentice in the darkroom of the Daily Mail. All the alchemy of replenishing paper lockers and the chemicals, the ideal leaven and this and that. There's a whole generation of photographers out there who don't understand the miracle of seeing something appearing before their eyes. It's like, and then, oh, got it. Give me another gin and tonic, because they see it's there. It's not there really. It's not there at all. They haven't seen anything. I was up this morning running around Liverpool photographing City I love and taking photographs and doing, like tomorrow morning, I'm going to get up and, PG, and I'm going to go down, take a cab down to Jamaica Street and photograph a big mural to Klopp, this wonderful manager who was so loved by many of the city of Liverpool, which is unusual for a football manager to have 12 years and be so loved. Many of them are not, but there's this big mural in this thing, and I want to do it because I remember when it was Beckett's centenary in 2006 in Notting Hill Gate. A gentleman we were drinking in the French, and he was a lecturer in the Royal College of Art in Kensington. Said, John, there's a wonderful mural of Samuel Beckett down just off of Notting Hill Gate. So, of course, I was down there the next day photographing this mural. And I think it's taken for one of my photographs of just peering away. And I love that. And I just, I just love that. But this picture of Lady Diana Spencer, one morning, during that night, I was drinking. A friend of mine just passed away a few months ago called Vince Power. Vince used to have furniture shops in Kilburn. But then he opened up which was a country and western venue in Harleston and in Wilson in London. It didn't work as a country and western venue, but it worked as a blues club. And I was with him during the night, and I went straight down to South Kensington, and I was reading Nigel Dempster in the Daily Mail, who said, Prince Charles has relinquished his relationship with Sarah Spencer and is now seeing her younger sister, who's working in a kindergarten in Pimlico. So I was only 15 minutes away, and I thought, I went straight down there, 10 to 7 in the morning, knocked the door. A lady came out who was the head mistress, as I now understand it, Lucy Hallett Smith. She had this 3-barrel name. I said, look, I've just seen a story in the Daily Mail, and I'd like to photograph Lady Diana Spencer, if possible. Hold on. Obviously, Diana was primed at that stage, because if it was in the Daily Mail, it meant it was out there for public consumption. So within a few minutes, Diana came out, and she was so gracious, so human, 18 years of age, and she said, what do you want to, I said, well, obviously, Lady Diana, we can have a picture of you holding two of the children. Obviously, we had to get permission from the parents of the kids, and of course, at that stage, at 10 to 7 in the morning, London, all the sound of kids crying and playing was rampant in there. And there she came out with two children, and I photographed her in the sunshine, and I had a Nikon F35mm, and as I'm looking at her, and I'm photographing her in a Madonna-esque pose, holding one of the children in her arms and the other one by her side. And because for me, she was the human face of the royal family. And she was gracious and bubbly and vivacious, and the picture, anyway. I sent the picture back by dispatch rider. There was nobody around, only me. I created that image. Within 20 minutes of time, suddenly the area is absolutely full of still photographers, camera crews, this, that, and the other. And she wouldn't come out again, would not come out again. And of course, at this point, my picture is already back in Fleet Street, back, possibly being, well, as it turned out to be page 1 and page 3. The first time ever the pictures were singing. And when I looked at the picture, I thought, yeah, there was nothing sordid about it. To me, it's just a beautiful picture of her absolute love for children. She loved it. And she loved her prince, of course. Well, we know what happened there, don't we? Anyway, she was gracious. And I was with her for about 2 weeks. And on the last occasion, certainly I was taken off the story, was she came out into her, she was driving a mini car, I think, and she was followed by what I call bounty hunters, because she created something. I mean, at this stage, 2 weeks on, every magazine in the world wanted pictures. And she went to Berkeley Square, near the American Embassy. She parked her car and just went into the square and sat on a wooden bench and burst out crying, which was, and I mean, there was a dozen photographers around, photographing her. I mean, we learned nothing in 2,000 years. Nothing. And I said, I found up the picture. I said, look, I'm not taking this picture. Who rebuffed me? You're not paid to make decisions. Well, that's exactly what I am paid to do. I make decisions. I'm an ambassador for whoever I represent at this point, and I'm not going to do this. What I did was I got a dozen roses, went back to her apartment. It was about 2:30, 3:10 in the afternoon. Rang the doorbell because I was well familiar with which apartment she lived in, and ran across the road because I knew she'd look out the window, and I'm a solitary figure dripping with cameras and a bunch of flowers. She sees me and she comes downstairs. She's apologizing for crying. Oh, Jesus, you've nothing to apologize. This is from the bona fide photographer. So I gave her the flowers. And of course, I was taken off the story then. I never quite saw her like that anymore. I was, that was the end of the game. But there's not a day goes by she's not in my thoughts and prayers. Good people, because, there are 12% of the population. We're still going to make sure we listen to Beethoven or read whatever we want to read. Civilization has to continue. Padraig Keough, over the years I've been covering a lot of the troubles in Northern Ireland. And, if I mention to you Oscar Wilde, this is the importance. What's going to come into your head is a photograph. It ain't a painting. It's a photograph. We think about, right in terms. This is Padraig Keough, who was the poet of the Troubles. I equate him. What he is to poetry, Francis Bacon was to painting. Agony and the Artist. Keough was an extraordinary poet who was published by small publications, little pamphlet publishers in the north of Ireland. And yet he comes out with words like, the prayer book is putting on fat with in memoriam cards. And it was Brian Keenan, the writer, who was 5 years a captive in Beirut, who met me in Belfast in 1984 or 83, I think it was. I was over there doing what one does at that time. And he said, John, you have to photograph my friend, Padraig Keough. It's a pseudonym for a man called Patrick Joseph O'Connor, who was born on the Falls Road. Anyway, the next day was organized. We were in, Brian brings down Padraig to that famous bar, which was used in The Odd Man Out as a film. I think it was Sir Carol Reed did it. And but Padraig drank copious amounts of, I remember, Teacher's whiskey. He had a preference for Teacher's. But this is him in his little flat on Cromwell Road near the university, the beginning. When I come back in 1986, Padraig Keough, Brian Keenan is kidnapped 5 years in Beirut. So I bring over Keough to London to do readings to keep Padraig's name alive. And I'd already photographed Brian with Padraig, so that made some of the photographic magazines, and it made the Diary of the Evening Standard. Padraig is gone now, of course. His centenary is this year in Belfast. Now, all the Northern poets, the Heaney's, the Muldoons, the Longleys, they've all touched on the Troubles, but this man was the perpetual heartbeat. And I'm hoping later on now in a couple of months' time to go back to Belfast, because for years I've been photographing the murals and the Falls and the murals in the Shankill. And I wanted to do this little thing on Padraig Keough to celebrate his life and get some of the great actors to read some of the work. Also, over the years, I've been going to Havana, Cuba for 20-something years, photographing Havana, because Hemingway, one of the authors that I never got to photograph, although I knew his brother was Sir Peter Green. I never got to photograph Graham Greene. I would have done, but it was supposed to happen. My aunt's daughter worked as a caretaker for Sir Hugh Green back in Gloucester Road, and it was going to be arranged that I'd photograph his brother, but it never happened. So I was always curiously interested in Our Man in Havana and Graham Greene's book on The Third Man in Vienna. And I spent 20 years going back to Havana because it's a city full of interest. The American photographer Walker Evans, back in the mid-30s, was commissioned to do a book on Havana, well, Cuba, but mostly Havana. And nothing had changed there. I mean, because Cuba's been under an embargo by the Americans for something like 67 years. I mean, they won't even allow in powdered milk, into the country, because there's certain presidents back some years ago thought it was an evil of access. Confused me. I mean, I don't know. Didn't see that. But while I was in Havana, I went to the ballet, and I saw this lady, Alicia Alonso. Yeah, there was a production of Giselle being performed in the National Theatre, and I got so excited. I wanted to photograph her, and the opportunity came when she invited me to over. This was when she was in the UK. This was in Wales at the Millennium Centre in Cardiff, and she invited me to the ballet school in Havana to come and photograph. She said to her interpreter, "You're the first Irishman to come and visit me in my hometown," because back in the 30s, she was a prima ballerina for the New York Ballet Company. So, of course, I was very excited to Derek Mann. Oh, as I said, I photographed a lot of poets. Derek Mann was my dear, dear comrade and friends by his typewriter. Now, there'll come a time when in life people won't even know what a typewriter looked like. And William Trevor invited me down to Devon there back in the early 80s to photograph him with his typewriter. William used to call me Jack. Because, of course, when you're Irish and you're called John, Jack, Sean, it's not unusual. But Derek Mann, Derek actually had an aversion sometimes, he didn't like too many people floating around him. And he didn't like other poets sometimes. Well, he was cautious about who he was in the company with, but he liked photography and he liked me, and this was taken in his home, in his apartment in Kinsale. But it's something. The journey goes on, and I hope I've actually given you some encouragement to go back in and get your analog cameras out. Spend an extortionate amount of money on film, and which it is. I mean, I was telling Jerry, 5 rolls of film for a Rolleiflex camera is €110 now. That's even before you develop it. And you just said, oh God, put your prices up. Anyway, I don't do that. I don't think, because I'm 95% photographer and I'm 5% business, because I want people to understand, particularly young photographers, that the corporate world is trying to steal their soul. There's no question about that. This is, culture has a very short shelf life today. And I get so excited looking at those Victorian, what they call carte de visites and cabinet cards, of when people used to dress up and go to the photographer, and like men in factories in Athy, County Kildare would, on a Friday night, throw off their overalls and get into their best suit to go down to one of the 42 pubs in the town of Athy, County Kildare to drink. It was an occasion. And I love those. I mean, I'm always looking back. And of course, that's why I said, like over the last 16 months, having this procedure, and I felt my voice was getting clearer. Yeah, I think you could understand what I was saying, thanks be to God. But I did have a piece of plastic hanging from my throat for about 6 months. It wasn't pleasant, but I was very fortunate. I got good people around the place. And constant prayer to stay in the light. Because cancer loves the dark. It loves, the dark. But if you're in the light and you pray, man, you're on the winning side. So I want to thank you all again for giving me the opportunity to be here in this wonderful institution. Thank you so much. Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay. Hope you can hear me. We've run a bit over time, but I think that was worth running over time for because it was absolutely fascinating, John, completely. We'll take a couple of questions. There's bound to be folk here who want to ask something after a fascinating talk like that. Hands up. Are you also stunned by it that you can't think of a question?
Thank God.
Come on. There must be a budding photographer who wants to ask something. Oh, here we go. A willing volunteer.
Hi, John. That was really a fantastic presentation. And I was very interested in the way that you talked about, or you indicated how intimate your relationship was with Beckett. And in contrast to the photographs of the Wake, where you ran into accusations of being intrusive.
Yes, yeah.
And I just wondered about this question of your relationship with Beckett and taking those photos of him, those sequences. His gaze is very interesting. Sometimes he's looking away. Once or twice he's looking directly at you. They made me wonder, what were you talking about at the time? Were you talking to him at the time? Was he talking to you?
What's your first name?
Bob.
Bob. That's very interesting because when you think back to like Beckett in the coffee shop, in the cafe, he came in at the appointed hour of 3 o'clock because, like on the Saturday, that shot was taken on the Sunday. On the Saturday, we're together and, when it's time to go after a couple of hours, I said to him, Sam, by the way, Anthony Cronin, the writer, who many will know, knows that I'm here with you and said to me, if there's an opportunity to get a new portrait of Sam, ask him. And I left it to the end and I said, because, Cronin had said, he has an aversion to traveling and coming back to Ireland and he might be up for a picture, with the great. Anyway, so I said, Sam, is there any opportunity that we could get a new portrait of you? Because the San Quentin Drama Group were going to be performing Endgame and Kraft's Last Tape in the Abbey Theatre, in the Abbey Theatre's studio there's a little studio downstairs from the Abbey. And of course, they knew you wouldn't be coming over for it. And the pictures I have taken in the Riverside 20 of those will be exhibited. Anyway, Sam said, yeah, come back tomorrow at 3 o'clock and bring the camera. Well, that evening I went out and got absolutely, completely and utterly obliterated on Beaujolais Village. Because I knew I was traipsing around the streets of Paris where George Moore, James Joyce, and other luminaries had gone before. And I went in, John Calder, Beckett's publisher, had introduced me to a little bar. I think it's called the Swiss Cafe. It's on the corner of the Vaugirard and and the Luxembourg Gardens. And I went in there and I drank a bottle of Beaujolais Village, and I was so excited to be walking up and down the rue, that shop where Sylvia Beach and Monnier had, the rue de Seine. And I remember I did a self-portrait of myself in the window. I mean, obviously Sylvia went and of course there is another Shakespearean company, but the name was appropriated by an American gentleman called George Whitman, who appropriated the name Shakespeare and Company. So I took a self-portrait of Minihan holding the Hasselblad. That shot was taken on a Hasselblad with a 35mm lens, because on the day, as I said, I knew where I wanted to be by the window. Why do we need the window? Because we need light. That's the main ingredient to a photographer, light. Now, I do know with digital stuff you can take pictures in a coal house. But anyway, so that was the reason. So Sam is talking to me about, I mentioned film earlier on, about his entree into the world of movie making. Was published by Faber and Faber, and it had won a film award in Italy at the time. And there was also this gentleman in Ireland called Dr. Owen O'Brien, who published a book giving an Irish context to Beckett's work called Beckett Country. Sort of grand, big kind of book. And Sam was pleased about it and said, do you know Dr. O'Brien? I do now know Owen very well now, but I didn't at that stage. But I'd actually read about this new publication. And then, of course, it was the banter about the price of a pint of Guinness and McDade's and other, bits of banality, which made him laugh. But then suddenly, like 3 o'clock went into 3:30, then 4 o'clock, then 4:20. I thought the moment it's not going to happen. And then all of a sudden he says, "John, do you want to take a photograph in here?" Well, my heart leapt a beat. I took the Hasselblad from my camera bag. And as I said, I'd already designed the picture because I wanted to place Beckett. This is Sam in his beloved city that gave birth to photography. And if you look at it, you read the photograph, his face has left me as if I don't exist. But of course I do exist, because the coffee cup full of his cigarillos and my, Gulwals, well, Alan Delon was smoking them. It had to be cool at the time, you know what I mean? And so I took that photograph, and there was only 3 exposures. And then we went onto the street and shot another few pictures. But, at that moment, I knew I had something extraordinary. And I couldn't wait to get back to London to process the film. And that's, that went on, And then, of course, I was in correspondence with him. Some of his notes to me are in the National Library of Ireland. He'd be talking about, "John, thanks for the production shots of Godot or Endgame," whatever I was doing, But those little cards are in the National Library.
Okay, John, I just want to squeeze in one more question so we can...
Hello, John. I'm Angela.
Angela, nice to meet you.
Hi. I just want to know, are there any photos of Samuel Beckett when he was younger? And if so, where are they?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Beckett's neighbor in Paris at the time was a man called Brassai, who Samuel Beckett told me he knew Brassai as a sculptor, and at that time had a piece of his sculpture, because he asked me about him, because I know Brassai as a photographer. But if you look at an early Penguin edition of Malone Dyes, with the red and the white thing, there's a thumbprint photograph of Beckett taken by Brassai. But he was also photographed by Richard Avedon, one of the gods of photography. And Barney Ross had arranged for Sam to do that, to photograph Beckett. And it was a torturous experience for Beckett, who only did it because Barney Ross, he couldn't refuse his American publisher anything. And I mean, when people like, David Bailey, they organize shoots, they have assistants and they have this, and it's an enormous production. As William Burr said about my photography, Minihan is a painless photographer. You're in, you see it, it's done. Wow. So, he's been photographed by Avedon, by Brassai, and by lots of people,
Okay, John.
And I just wanted to add, Angela, Jerry, just before you go, the car I photographed, in Dublin now they have the Beckett Bridge.
Yes.
And when it was unveiled, I was down there taking photographs of the Beckett Bridge. And having photographed the car, I had suggested to the people in this magisterial position of power. The first car over Beckett Bridge should be it didn't happen.
Very good, John.
Anyway, that's it, you know.
Okay, I think it's a discussion which we're very reluctant to bring to a conclusion because we could listen to you all day. I think it was completely fascinating, not just in terms of the iconic images that you've shown us that you've produced, but also the mine of information that you are about the people that you've taken as well. So, folks, could I just, on behalf of the festival, on behalf of Liverpool, invite you to show your appreciation for John's talk again. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Was it okay?